where maximum errors can occur. Because in our country, where the transportation mode is varied, if a sample is collected, see, I'll tell you, I live in a colony in Delhi where there are at least 20, 30 collection centers. So each big house is advertising that you come to our collection center, or they will come to your home and collect the sample. And a cycle wala, on a cycle, he drives to the home and collects the sample, puts in the carrier, and then how it goes. So that credibility has to be established. That's most important.
The sample transport, what our Dr. Anil Reliaji has told us, Mahatma Gandhi said in 1942. He was in Wardha in the month of June, very hot. He was in Sevagram. He had rigor and he was going to urinals very frequently. And Dr. Sushila Nair was a young doctor that time. And she told Bapuji, aapka kya bhi takleef hai? My English, Hindi is not good. Gandhiji said, yes, I'm going to urinals very often. I am having rigor. I am feeling very cold. Then Sushila Nair said, aapka pishab ka test karna hai. That those days in 1942, even in Nagpur, there were no facilities for a detailed study of the urine for microbiological study. Then Gandhiji asked her, where will you get it tested? What will you get tested? Gandhiji, aapka urine hum Hopkins Serum Institute ko bhejna hai, Bombay. And he said, how much time it will take? She said, 36 hours from Wardha to Mumbai in 1942 by the super fast express deluxe passenger train. Then Gandhiji said, I went to urinals 5 minutes ago. Again I went, everything is dry in this heat. What will happen to my urine sent in that bottle to that Bombay? She said, no, even if it evaporates dry, they will reconstitute with some water and test it. I tell you, this is documented in his book. Then Gandhiji said, Beti, in that case, don't send my urine. You send me there, I will give my fresh urine. Look at the man, father of the nation, who thought about the problem associated with the sample transportation.
Anyway, something to add here. NABL is working on a document. We will come up with a document on this transportation of samples, pre-examination, and soon it will be discussed and we'll reveal it to you. Okay, we'll go to the next topic, examination documentation by Dr. Usha Anand.
Good afternoon to all of you. Examination documentation, when you think of it, probably the first thing that comes to your mind is the standard operating procedures that we should write down. For each of the measurements or each of the analytes that we examine in the lab, we should have well-written, documented procedures. And the standard has very clearly described what are all the things that need to be included when we write a standard operating procedure. Starting from, it has given a long list of what are the subheadings under which you should write a standard operating procedure. And each of these, if you address, starting from, say, why that particular test is performed, what is the purpose of the examination, and what is the principle of the method, what is the instrument that you are going to use, what are the reagents that you are going to use, how are you going to store your reagents, is it going to be kept at room temperature, or is it needs to be refrigerated, and after that, how long you have to keep it outside to thaw, and so on. Every bit of detail needs to be included in the standard operating procedure. And you also need to document what type of samples need to be collected in order to carry out a particular test, and what are the preservatives that have to be used for a particular test, like what type of sample, what type of preservative, what type of collection tube, and so on. And the other details, the details of how the procedure is to actually be, how it has to be carried out. And further to that, the performance characteristics of a particular test. How sensitive is it? Is it going to give me the result in terms of say micrograms or nanograms or milligrams per dl or liter and so on. What is the sensitivity? What is the least limit of detection of a particular analyte? And what is the linearity of the particular, what is the concentration that I could measure without the need for any dilution or concentration, without changing anything in the reagent that I'm using. And what could I hope to achieve by a further dilution? What is the limit that I am allowed to dilute and so on? So all these, what is the precision of the method? How does it compare with a gold standard method and so on? So there is a lot of things that needs to be written in great detail when you actually write down the examination procedure. And what do you start off with? To start off with, maybe you would be having the pack insert. What is given by the manufacturer, you would be having a kit insert. So that forms the basis of most of the things that we write. So using the kit insert and using whatever validation studies that have been carried out in the lab, you have to write down your own standard operating procedure for the particular test in all the details. So that document forms the basis of not only your performing the test, it also forms the basis of how you're going to train your people to perform the test. And if there is, in case there is a new entrant, he will go through that and he will first familiarize himself with what the examination test is all about and so on. It forms the basis of, see, if you have something written down, whether you perform the test or whether somebody else performs it, all of them would be doing it in the same way. So there's a lot, the aspect of doing the test in the same way, or whether A does it or B does it, that also, the writing down the examination procedure helps us to maintain the same way of performing the test, uniformity in the way the test is performed. So the standard operating procedure is a very important document, examination documentation. If we have to make sure that we do our tests in the right way every time that we do it. And not only that, we also have to look at maybe how we are going to run our QCs. What are the quality control material that we're going to use? How frequently are we going to run the QCs? How many levels of QCs are we going to run? How many times in a day? Are we going to run it every morning? So I mean, just before we do the test, are we going to run it again in the afternoon? And so on. All those details also need to be written down. And further to that, what are the rules that we're going to follow? What are the criteria to make sure that the test is in control? So all such details, minute details, should be written down. And of course, the reference intervals. We have to write down what are the reference intervals for that particular examination, the test that is being performed, and age specific and gender specific and so on. And also, we have to touch upon what are how this particular test is going to be useful. What is the interpretation once the test has been performed and so on. So it's a lot of details that needs to go into the examination documentation. And it's not that anybody can just sit and write it. It has to be decided who is going to write the test. Write down the examination documentation. There should be specific people, experienced people, persons who are identified, who are capable of writing down the SOP. Only such people have to write, should sit down and write it. And it has to be written by a particular person. It has to be verified, and it should be signed and so on with a date. And another thing is, it is considered to be a living document. It's not that once you write an examination procedure, it's going to last forever. It needs to be looked at frequently, and whenever there is a need, it has to be revised, and what revisions are made needs to be documented and so on. So the whole process of examination documentation has to be done in a very methodical way, and it has to have all the document identifiers and so on.
Well, the most important thing is the SOP should be user-friendly and written in a language which can be understood by the lowest level. Okay.
One small input. Very often, our laboratory people ask, what is the difference between document and a record? Though Document control, as you know, under 4.3 and 4.13, we have control of records. Now, most of the documents undergo revision. There are periodic revision, new editions come, new version will come. Therefore, all documents undergo amendments, and then revision version. Records will undergo only correction. Let us keep in mind, nobody should amend record. Records are what is, after the event has happened, what happened at that time, on that day, by whom is recorded. If that has to be amended, that means the whole system need to be amended. Therefore, records undergo correction. Therefore, documents undergo amendments. After correction, it goes to next step of amendment, reissue, version. These are all very nicely described in ISO 15189. Records shall not be amended, shall be only corrected, and every correction will have a documentary evidence who corrected, when, why. And original version, uncorrected version will also be retained in order to have a traceability why this action has been taken.
Sir, you said records are only revised, revised. No. Records have to be corrected and documents have to be amended. But we have a result which is amended. So we have amended reports in many laboratories when we are seeing. That is correct, or is it wrong terminology?
Amended is okay. It's only a slight difference in the language that is used, that's all. It is a action, yeah. But still, they use the word amended.
Standard says only revised, revision of reports. Who shall revise the reports?
Revision is different.
Yeah, right.
Before release of report, he is reviewed, and if anything has to be done. Once it is issued, when you call back for correction, it is called correction.
Even there, actually, we are supposed to still retain the original report that has been given. Yes, that is being used. It's because, you know, the synonymous in English.
Standard doesn't say. Standard says only revised. Standard says revised reports. Another common question which people ask regarding the examination procedures is whether the kit insert which is filed in a methodical manner, is it enough? And when we ask them for documents related to test procedures, they just take out that file and show it. But all of you must realize that what goes into the internal document, the SOP which is generated by the laboratory, as Madam highlighted the points, will include information which is derived from the kit insert, will include information derived from published literature like reference ranges, will include information derived by the laboratory like your precision and the limits of detection and so on, plus information which is given by way of feedback from your clinicians by way of critical alert values. So the internal document which you should generate is a must and will not replace, or rather the kit insert will not replace your internal document.
Okay, we continue the discussion further. The next topic is post-examination documentation.
Sir, I take your permission to make
Please.
a short presentation.
So kindly go ahead.
So, my way of analyzing the post-examination process is that the workflow which is there from the time the results are ready until the time the reports are dispatched and all that. So there are basically three major components which comprise the post-examination part of the workflow process. One is related to the result. The second is related to the sample, and third is related to data. I think all of you will realize that when you start from clause 5.7, you go through 5.7 to 5.10, basically it discusses these 3 points: the result related issues, sample related issues, and data related issues. I also told you yesterday that when it comes to documentation, there are certain mandatory documents which the standard requires, and there are a number of laboratory generated documents. So let's try to understand which are the mandatory documents and which are the laboratory related or laboratory generated documents that are required. We'll deal with it one by one. Dealing with result related documentation, basically review of results. So it says authorized person shall systematically review the results and then authorize the release. So related to review of results, reporting of results means converting the values or transcribing the values into a test report, and release of this report to the authorized people. So the people who are defined recipients of the report should be receiving the report. So these are the three major activities related to the test results. When it comes to sample, there is sample storage, sample retention, and safe disposal of the sample. All these are activities after the testing has happened, right? And the third one is data related, basically related to information management. Now coming to one by one, the documents that you require. One is, of course, we need process flow charts across. So 2012 standard mandates the laboratory to develop process flow charts. Then we have mandatory documents, which I've already mentioned to you, and laboratory generated documents. Can I proceed? You've taken the photo? Okay. So now coming to review. Now, as far as the standard is concerned, there is no mandatory document required, and it says it shall have a procedure in place, not a documented procedure. So laboratory developed procedure should be in place for review of results by authorized personnel. So that is one step of your document. Again, reporting, laboratory developed procedures, defining the format of reports, correctness of transcription, and various report attributes. This standard has outlined a number of report attributes which need to be incorporated in the report, but you can design your own format of report. You can design the own medium of transmission of the report based on your end user's requirement. There is a mandatory document for release of reports. Mandatory document for release of results, who may release to whom, information on compromise sample, critical alert, so on and so forth. If you read the standard, you have that, which is clause 5.9.1, and 5.9.2 deals with situations where laboratories, if they practice automated release of reports, then you have a mandatory documented procedure for 5.9.2. Mandatory documented procedure for sample retention, sample storage, retention, and disposal, including the way in which it should be stored, including the duration of storage after testing, and a detailed procedure of how the safe disposal of these samples need to be done. Information management, there is again mandatory procedure. There are two mandatory procedures related to clause 5.10.2 and 5.10.3. So that in brief covers your entire documentation system of all the post-examination processes.